Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Grierson. I am the senior U.S. critic for Screen International. For our blind and low vision attendees, I'm going to describe myself. I am wearing a gray button-down long sleeve shirt. I'm wearing eyeglasses. I have short graying hair, and I am in my office here in Los Angeles. And behind me is a bookcase with a lot of the books that I keep handy nearby me when I'm working on pieces for film and culture in general. It's my great pleasure to be moderating this Q&A for Hollywoodgate. And now I would like to introduce the director of Hollywoodgate, Ibrahim Nash'at.
Thank you, Tim. And I'm Ibrahim Nash'at, the director of the documentary. I'm wearing a green t-shirt with a collar, and behind me there is a shelf and a couple of house plants. And I am Middle Eastern looking with a dark, light brown skin and a lot of black curly hair and beard.
Thank you so much for being with us, Ibrahim, and congratulations on Hollywoodgate, which is really an exceptional documentary. The first thing I wanted to ask you was you spent about a year with the Taliban. I think most people who watch the film, their first question will be, how does one reach out to the Taliban? How do you actually get access to even talk to them about making a film about them?
Thank you so much, Tim, for doing this with us and moderating the Q&A for our film. We're very happy to be having this conversation with you. And regarding the access, is that the fact is that I worked in journalism for a decade, and during my work, I was very lucky that I have filmed with a lot of world leaders. And when you work in such environment, you learn how to reach people in power, basically. So when the Taliban took over, we started to track down how can we reach them out, and using the same techniques I used in my journalistic work, I was able to gain the primary access to the Taliban. And what was surprising to me that they were not interested in me filming with them because I'm from Egypt or because I'm Muslim, but they were interested in filming with me when they saw images of me or photos on my phone with people who are like presidents and vice presidents, and that they were like, look at this. And that was the initial access that they gave me. And at that time, they were really seeking validation from journalists. They were saying it was really early on when they just took power, and they were saying, we're Taliban 2.0, we're gonna let women have education. They were saying a lot of promises. And at that time, some reports came positive about them, and that made them really seek journalism for more of validation for themselves. And this is how I got the initial access, but the story became completely different by the time. And I've become myself like Sisyphus, and the access is my rock. I need to push it so hard to just gain 3 4 days, and then it's taken away, and I need to try and try and try. And it kept going all the way through until the last day of shooting, when the Secret Service approached me and said, "You've got to come to our office tomorrow with all your footage." And I realized that this is my clock in the country, so I decided to leave in the same day, and I didn't go to the office next day. I fled
To,
to Afghanistan.
We'll just start at the beginning of the process. What were those conversations about what the film was going to be? Obviously, it's your film, but you're filming the Taliban. They have an agenda, as you just described. What were sort of the rules that the Taliban kind of gave you in terms of what was okay to film, what was not okay to film? And also, I just have to assume that they must have pressured you in some ways in terms of, oh, make sure you show this, make sure you show that we have changed, that we are different, that we're not the Taliban that people have expected from the past.
In reality, the Taliban expected they didn't really think I would stick around for the whole time. They thought I'm saying I want an access for a year, but I would stay for a couple of days, and then by the time I started to stay longer, so it became like restrictions started to increase. There was security guard accompanying me most of the time. I was with them almost 24/7, never on my own. And I know if I ever try to do anything that would risk the access that I have, such as going and filming with some people that they wouldn't like, that would make my access go away. So I made sure that I don't preach the agreement that I had with them that I'm able to film within the military spaces, and I was sticking to that. And whenever they asked me not to film something, I would not film it. Whenever they asked me, someone of like a higher position, whenever they asked me film something, I would always film it. And we ended up having 220 hours of material. And as you know, documentary is all about finding the moments that you could actually use and not the moments that are not usable. So there were a lot of material in our footage that we knew from the beginning, this is not really something we're willing to use in our film. And as we understand that they were seeking, from the beginning, they were seeking propaganda through our camera, we decided to make a movie about propaganda, and that took away a lot of its power.
Did they want to see your footage during the process of that year? Did they want to see what you were shooting to see like what's this guy filming? What's this guy showing? Do we come off looking powerful and wise? You know, did they ask you to see your footage?
On a daily basis, there would have been conversations to ask me to show the footage, but I quickly realized it's mainly about how they look like rather than it's an intelligent way of looking at it. So I started to always show them footage of themselves looking really nice, and they would just focus on how they looked nice in these shots. But every now and then they would always ask, "Can we see the footage?" And I'm always like, "Welcome, please. This is the hard disk. This is sorry, the camera. You can watch whatever you want on the camera." And then when they ask me, we want to see something edited, I say the editing process starts after the shooting is over. And they never really asked to see the final product, because they told me, we know that the moment you leave the country, we have no control over you or your footage. So they tried to control my footage when I was still there. And as I understand them, the longer I stay, the more I can find those strong moments that made the film that we have at the moment.
For people who have seen the documentary but are watching this Q&A right now, they may not be aware that you had an interpreter with you the entire time. And I'm curious about the pros and cons of not speaking the same language as your subject and having an interpreter. What are the pros and cons of that?
I think the biggest pro is that there is a layer of filtration, and I was very lucky to have with me this incredible interpreter and line producer, Adel Safi, who we had to pull out of Afghanistan for security purposes, and now he lives with me here in Berlin. And it was really great that Adel many times filtered what I said, translated into not just the words that I'm saying, but actually things that they would accept hearing. Even if I'm saying things that were wrong, he would just directly protect me. And sometimes maybe I would lose my temper a little bit when something happens, or I would say an aggressive response, and he directly filters that into something that is not aggressive. So that really somehow saved my life in many situations, and I'm super in awe to him for doing that. And the other thing is that there was a lot of times that he would speak badly about me, and I asked Adel really early on, Adel, please don't translate these things. And Adel did not translate any of that for the rest of the year. So when he came to Berlin and we figured out that there is a lot of threats in the footage, I was like, Adel, they are talking really bad about me in many situations, calling me with my mom and my dad and everything around me. And he said, this is only what you recorded. It was way more than that. And I was like, but that means you were in danger. Why didn't you tell me about that? And he responded by saying, I put my back for you on the line. And that's actually what happened when the US went into Afghanistan, is that a lot of Afghans have decided, because they trusted the Americans, to put their back for them on the line. And they were suddenly overnight left behind. And most of them are now struggling, either being forced to work for the Taliban, as the Taliban has forced everybody that worked in the previous government to come back to work, or hiding somewhere, and the US government is not doing what it is supposed to do in regards to those who they left behind.
Obviously, when you are making a documentary, you have these hopes, aspirations, ideas, but then what happens informs what you're going to end up making. Did you have any sense when you started of just how much US military weapons, devices, things were going to be left behind at Hollywoodgate? I think it's $7 billion that you mentioned at the end of the film. Did you have any sense when you started just how many things the US military left behind when they left Afghanistan?
I actually expected in the beginning really a couple of rifles. That's the maximum that I thought. And I thought that I'm just gonna make a movie about this Hollywoodgate and how the Taliban's are living within American space. But quickly the story of the weapons started to come, which I didn't believe it is ever gonna work. So whenever they say we're fixing things, I didn't believe them. And I was shocked the day of the parade, like anyone who would watch the movie there is at the end, the parade when they celebrate the 1 year anniversary, and watching these things, these airplanes or aircrafts fly around was as shocking to me as it is to any of the viewers. And I really realized when we are in the editing process that I went there with the mentality that I'm more sophisticated than the Taliban. So if their leaders cannot calculate 67 times 100, then he is judged to be somehow ignorant, and I'm more educated than him. And I was shocked at the end, and that made me realize that I should not judge the simplicity of the other side and judge their intelligence based on my intelligence, because every kind of culture has its own intelligence, and we should always try to understand the other side then rather than just deciding that they are not going to be able to fix these things, because that's what happened. These were left behind, and the expectation and the official report was saying these will never ever be functioning again, yet we see them functioning today.
I know this is sort of outside the scope of your documentary, but I imagine that you must have wondered how could the US military be so stupid, frankly, to leave things behind that the Taliban could easily repair, use. I mean, there's also all that medicine that you show in the film. For me, it just speaks to just the arrogance and just the complete lack of forethought in terms of leaving all that stuff behind. But I'm curious for you being there and seeing it, how could the US governments be so, how could the US military be so short-sighted?
I guess that's the question of the movie. And that's what we're trying to do in our impact campaign, in meeting with a lot of decision makers and foreign policy makers. When we talk with them and we say that this is a huge mistake, that what happened, and how did that forever war mentality even exist in the first place, that allowed us to stay in Afghanistan, that allowed the US to stay in Afghanistan for that long, 20 years of war, 4 different administration, and they all agreed to continue that war. And when they decided to pull out, the pullout was done by 2 administration from both parties, and the outcome was what we see today. And they left the country in the hands of the Taliban at the end. And today, nobody really talks about Afghanistan, and nobody's really considering bringing the topic of Afghanistan or the topic of the failure of being in Afghanistan back to the front.
There are, for me, two striking absences in the film. We don't see the US military officials, obviously, but we also don't see much of anything in terms of everyday Afghanis. Obviously, that's intentional on your part, but I feel like you think about them even though we don't see them. I'm curious for you, did you have any thought of including just sort of everyday people living in Afghanistan who are now dealing with the Taliban, or did you want to just focus on your subject, the Taliban?
For security purpose, we really took it early on, this decision that we're not gonna try to risk and film with normal Afghans or citizens. And I had this idea really early on that why don't I send another, since I got this really one of a kind access, why don't I send another cameraman to film the daily life of the people, and then we combine these footage together. But quickly we had this discussion and we said, whoever appears in this movie next to the Taliban, we're putting their life in danger. And we're kind of forcing them and their family to leave the country. And if we're not able to provide them and their family to leave the country and provide them with a life outside, then we'd rather not take this risk of risking the lives of these people just for making some additional scenes. And we relied on the power of cinema, that cinema is a very powerful tool. You don't need to see everything, but you could feel its presence. You could feel the presence of the American army and the presence of the soldiers that are feeling a lot of pain for the time that they spent in there while they were there, and today knowing the result out of it. And you could feel the pain of the Afghan and Afghan women specifically, and what they are facing with the Taliban, from all of this pressure that they are not allowing them even to walk on the street, with how they want to walk. They are not allowing them to go to parks. They are not allowing them to have education. And now even the most recent decree has made their voice banned in public from singing or speaking loud. And it just a huge apartheid that is being applied on women and on even normal Afghans who never had the choice to have the Taliban rule them this way.
I know that you are a big fan of Frederick Weissman and seeing Hollywoodgate, there's no direct interviews. There are Weissman-esque qualities to your film. Was
Mm.
that partly because you admire Weissman so much, or is it also just the situation that you were in that you didn't want to do direct interviews with your subjects?
You know, initially when you go out to do a movie, you have this really high hopes of artistically coming out with a result, and then by the time either that serves the purpose of your movie or no. I went out trying to make this observational film that doesn't even have my character in it, or as we call the character in the movie, the cameraman's character in it, and we wanted just to watch the Taliban and their daily life. But quickly we realized that it's impossible to make a movie about the Taliban without having at least the cameraman as a tool to guide us, to take our hands into the story and out of the story. So we needed to rely on that, but also the Wiseman kind of approach and the observational approach. No, I'm not gonna call it verti because he doesn't like that word, but the observational approach to the film has actually been incredible for the security of the access and continuation of my stay, because I realized quickly that if I don't talk much and I don't ask questions, they don't get to understand where I am or or where I'm going or where I'm coming from. They just allow me in because I'm not a bother to them. And the more I ask questions, the more they want to ask me questions. And every question comes with an answer and comes with a question. So actually not asking questions and not conducting interviews has incredibly helped me continuing the process of shooting.
I'm curious about you showing the film to USC or other US policy makers, members of the US government, members of the US military. I would love to know if you have spoken with them and shown them the film. What is their response to Hollywoodgate?
I mean, official response we haven't received. We've showed the film to some officials in the US and mainly in the European Union. We've had a huge a screening in the European Parliament, with the European Parliament and European Commission. It was introduced by the Vice President of the European Commission for Media, Vera Jourova, and we had multiple meetings with the US, with US or with European representatives, and all of them said it's very important to consider the topic of Afghanistan. Nobody has spoken about the fact of what do we do about that, but we are now focused mainly on the foreign policy of the US that has allowed this war to start in the first place. Because if the foreign policy would not allow to have that such a prolonged war without having a clear exit plan to exist in the first place, we wouldn't have been here. That war in Afghanistan would have lasted maximum for 3 months, and then it would have been over, which was back then even the military suggestion to pull out of Afghanistan, and that was ignored. So what we hope is that somehow we affect with this movie the foreign policy of the US that doesn't allow this to happen again. And we definitely hope that we find way of supporting the Afghan, especially the Afghan woman nowadays, and not keep them left behind under the iron fist of the Taliban while just applying sanctions and forgetting about what's happening there on a daily basis.
You've talked about the fact just today and in other interviews about this idea about the US forgetting and frankly wanting to forget about what the US, what we did in Afghanistan. But I am curious now that the Taliban has been in power for a few years there. Do you have any sense in terms of world leaders, other people that you've spoken with? Has the whole world forgotten about Afghanistan and what the Taliban is doing there, especially in terms of women's rights there? Is it just the US who have forgotten, or is it the world in general
I
who have
think
forgotten?
I think the movie is focused mainly on the US because we were in a CIA or so-called CIA base. But the reality is that the US and NATO were both there, and like all countries of US and NATO, they would rather forget about the fact that they were in this war and the Taliban are now in power. But that's not the way we should deal with things, especially that we should not deal with with Afghanistan and the situation with the Taliban as if we're doing charity for Afghanistan. It's rather an obligation on us because the situation they are in today, the situation that the Afghans are in today, the West has participated so much in making it happen. The people did not choose the Taliban to rule them for the last 3 years, and they did also not choose the West and specifically the US and the NATO to invade their country for 20 years. And they did not choose also the Soviet Union to invade their country before that, or the Brits before that. And the country has been torn by 42 years of continuous war, 3 years of the ruling of the Taliban. People are suffering from a huge level of PTSD. Peacefulness doesn't exist almost in the country. And really nothing really is happening to make sure that these people at least survive the next winter. We find a way to help them survive the next winter, which is going to be really, really heavy on them, especially that we're facing now the La Nina year, which means the winter in Afghanistan is going to be crazy cold. And you're talking about that there's 30% of the Afghans are without homes at the moment.
I want to thank you, Ibrahim, so much for being here today to talk to us about your film, Hollywoodgate. I've been speaking with the director of Hollywoodgate, Ibrahim Nash'at. Thank you so much and congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much, Tim. And I just want to add that this movie wouldn't have been possible to make without the great support of the team that was behind it. And I would like to mention the producers, Shem Boris, Odessa Ray, and Talal Dirki, and the executive producers, Dan Bicker, and Sahara Karimi, and all the others. Thanks.
Thank you.